Okay, it's supposed to be recording one. Let's see what it says. It's QuickTime Player. All right. Well, we're going to go here. We're going to go ahead and start if somebody else can come in. The key thing to remember is that each state is going to have different types of funding uh, formulas based on the history of that state, whether it's a university or community college or technical college. The first examples I'm going to give you have to do with Nichols budget, and I'll make it a little bigger so you can see it. Nichols budget, as you can see, total state funds is about $15,100,000. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but in 2007, the university was receiving $35.7 million. And what happened is that under the previous governor, Jindal, he cut colleges 10% a year for 8 years and increased tuition 10% a year to make that up and called it a balanced budget. It would not, because in order for us to charge to increase tuition, we have to get approval of the legislature. There's only 2 states in the whole United States that requires the legislature to approve any tuition and fee increases, which is why it's difficult to get funding. There are 2 types, or more than 2 types. There's 3 types of direct funding from the state. It's going to either be called general fund appropriation or education and general fund appropriation, depending on what state you're in. And so direct funding is what they approach and award the university based on a formula funding. For example, it's based on the number of scheduled credit hours that each institution produces. Each credit hour is worth so much funding. So like if there were an English 101 class, well, for a 3-hour 101 class, Nichols may get $3,000 for that class, and then all the different classes are added up and they come up with the formula. It's called the formula funding, and it's based on type of class, the expenses that it takes for the university to provide those classes. Like the engineering classes are going to be higher because there's a recognition that if you train somebody to be a writer, an English major, it's not going to be as costly for an instructor to come meet with the class or online with the class. Whereas with the engineering or the sciences, where there's chemistry labs and physics labs, you're going to need equipment and supplies that you don't need for an English class or a math class. Then there's dedicated, statutory dedicated. That's where the legislature takes a pool of money and divides it among the institutions, or if they pass a law, like for instance, we had the Women in Government Center. For years, the university got $250,000 from the state, added to its budget, but that money was dedicated. We couldn't use it for anything else. And so that's other forms. Okay, those are total state funds. There's also, well, when we get to self-generated, we'll do that. Okay, and then you notice self-generated funds is $41.5 million. So you can see about 70% of our budget comes from what we generate ourselves or what we charge in tuition and fees. Other forms of how you get institutional money comes from if you write a grant. Let's suppose you write a grant for $100,000. Well, every grant's going to have what they call administrative overhead costs. And that's going to be anywhere from 10% of the value of the grant to 150% of the value of the grant, depending on what it costs the university to operate. And so the university makes some money whenever there's a grant awarded after each grantee because the building's already in place. If you have a grant and you don't have a grant, you work in the lights and the air conditioning are the same cost. And so there's a monetary benefit to for universities and colleges to administer grants, and not just for reputation, but for funding. Like if you go to schools like LSU, they may generate $100 million a year in grant indirect costs. And that indirect cost is given to the university because you're providing the space, the equipment, the supplies, and so forth. Expenditures, there's 2 ways to account for expenditures. Expenditures are going to be either by function or by object. By function, they're going to have general things like instruction, research, public service, academic support, Academic support is going to include things like the library, the IT for the academic side of the house. Now, the institutional technology people, the part that's administrative functions like scheduling, paying fees, banner, that's going to primarily be administrative institutional services. Whereas if it's the library or it's Moodle, because Moodle's 100% academic, that's going to be paid for out of the academic instruction budget unit. And then other expenditures, see how education and general expenditures are going to include athletics. Each year the university appropriates so many dollars to athletics. And overall, the money that goes to athletics is about 2.4, 2.1 million a year. We'll find out when we pull it up. And this is looking at 17, 18, and 18, 19 budget requests. The first column, 17, 18 actual budgeted, requested, and what's the difference between the last 2 years. If you look at expenditures by object, you're going to have expenditures for salaries. Is 30 million out of 56 million spent on salaries. Benefits and related personnel services. As you can see, out of the $56 million, almost 57, 44.7 is spent just on personnel expenses. So when they cut, that's why you hear about layoffs and consolidations of positions. And because if they cut, it's going to impact almost 80%, 80% of our budget is spent on salaries. It's actually close to like 85, 87. And then there's things like related benefits. That's going to be things like insurance, retirement payment to the retirement account. The state sends back to the state retirement system, I think it's like 27% of everybody's salary for the retirement systems. The state has a matching plan where the employee pays so much of their insurance costs for medical insurance, and the state pays so much insurance costs. And so that's all going to be in benefits. Travel, self-explanatory. Operating services is going to be everything from contracts to keep the elevators running, to energy consolidation efforts. The air conditioning systems and heating systems for these buildings are not like at home where it's a central air unit. It's going to be primarily a piping chiller system where they have water that's either cooled and then fans blow over the cold pipe and create air conditioning, or it's going to be warm and it's going to keep warm. And so all these buildings in this quadrangle are looped underground to hook to one or two piping systems, and that's how they provide that, and that's cheaper in the long run. Professional services is where you hire someone to do a service for the campus that's not an employee of the campus. That could be, let me think of an example, besides utilities. It could be architectural design fees. It could be anything we hire somebody that's not an employee of the university to do is done under professional services. Debt services, we'll talk a little bit about that later. But the operating budget has no debt service. In Louisiana, unlike other states, they allow you to incur, like if the state financed building, say, Pelche Hall, in another state, they may allow the university to pay so much off notes every year. Whereas in Louisiana, when the state builds a building that's for instructional or operating budget, the state pays for the building, and then the university has to pick up the operational costs for the buildings, everything from the custodians to replacing, putting furniture in, to replacing the floors, cleaning the building. And we'll get into auxiliary services in a while. And then there's things like library acquisitions. That's pretty self-explanatory. That's keeping up with the latest books that are published, periodicals, newspapers, the operations of the archives, the government documents, all that stuff has to come out of the library. Major repairs, if there's a major repair, we have to go to the state to it. So anyway, as you can see, Nichols' budget is actually about $150,000 more, $197,000 more than the actual was last year. But that's going to equal 200,000 200,000 out of 56 million. That's less than 2%.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's better than a cut. And if you look at the other state institutions, they're all budgeted pretty much. I made it too big. Oh, come on. Okay, the first one is making this. There we go. Okay, in some places in Louisiana, depending on the history of the institution, there may be some generated funds that come from oil wells that are nearby. So that's a self-generated type of income. There may be rent, like if we took the building in Houma and rented that for other agencies or other businesses to use, that would be an income that's generated by the institution. And see, they had statutory dedications of 2.7 million, whereas we had about 1.2. And the Calcasieu Parish Fund, the parish apparently dedicates so much funds each year. But the rest of it is it's going to be the same. See how their state appropriation was 16 million, total 19, and the state government only gave them 48. And so the question becomes, when does an institution, a state institution, let's look at Louisiana. If a state supplies more than 50% of the funding to operate an institution, then it's called a state-supported institution. If it's less than 50%, then it's characterized as a state-assisted institution. As you can see, every institution this is UL Lafayette, they receive 47 million from the state or dedicated funds from other governmental resources. Their self-generated was 131 million. So this is about 3 times as much as that. So over 70% of their funding comes from self-generated. And so basically in Louisiana, our universities are no longer state-supported institutions, they're state-assisted institutions. And you can look at all the universities. I've made copies of all the universities in the University of Louisiana system. So University of New Orleans. But they're going to all have the same categories. Let's look at, so in Louisiana, there's going to be statutory dedicated, self-generated, and state appropriated with the state overall budget. What state do you have that you're working on? Tennessee. Tennessee may have a different type of funding thing, and that's one of the questions you have to address. Do the institutions get their funding from the state? Do they get it from local government agencies? In some places, they have community colleges where there's actually a local property tax to support the local community and technical colleges. But generally the state universities generally get a significant amount of their funding from the state. And so, but it is a little different. Like community and technical colleges in Louisiana don't have the same advantage that, say, a community college in Texas would have, because most of the community colleges there grew up with local community support, so they would pass property taxes called millage, which means so much money per $1,000 value of the property. Each year would go into a fund to support the institution. That's quite different. All right, let's look at auxiliary. Auxiliary budget units are those units that are not part of the instructional delivery function of the campus. Auxiliary units are going to have to generate all the money that they require each year to operate. So all of the auxiliary units' income is self-generated, and so this is Nichols' auxiliary budget for the past year. And auxiliary units are going to be things like the student union, ID card services, health services, food services, bookstore, family housing, continuing education, and then housing. And what has to happen is none of those units get $1 from the state to operate, not a dollar. When those units want to have a program or service, we actually have to finance the facility, like the rec center is an auxiliary unit also. But the students voted to assess themselves so much money year after year after year, and we used that guarantee to sell bonds, which people invest in bonds at a certain percentage charge each year, and it could be 2%, it could be 4% over 30 years each year. And so Nichols right now probably has about $75 million in debt that the dormitories, the cafeteria, the union, and all those things have to generate income each year. And so as you can see, the revenues are the top columns. This is from direct student union fees. Each student pays an ID card fee. Each student pays food services are generated in three different categories. They come from the meal plan if you live on campus, or if you shop for dining services in the snack bar or any of the other units on campus or Chick-fil-A. And then the third part becomes catering events that are held on campus. The university gets 15% of every dollar of income from food service. And so they get about $4 million a year. Now, that $4 million includes all the money collected for a meal plan. So they may collect $1,000 for a meal plan, but the university turns around and pays the food company 85%. And as you can see, the expenditures, revenues, let me go to expenditures. Oh, here's the expenditure. See, if you look at, oh, come on. Where it says merchandise for resale, if you follow this over, the total non-housing, the university out of that $4 or $5 million they collect has to pay the cafeteria $3,084,000 to provide the service. Other things is like the bookstore. We have a contract company. The company guarantees us they'll give us commissions of at least $200,000 a year minimum, and it's based on the amount of sale. It's like 10% of the first $2 million, and then 11% of every million thereafter. Well, there's going to be some expenses there, and they're lumped all together, and because they occupy a place in the student union, so there's utility costs that have to be paid. Just like out of the income that's made from food service, we have utilities for the cafeteria. If something breaks in at a university, fixes it or pays for it, and so it's not free flowing money. But when you look at the overall thing, you look at the total income, total expenditures. They didn't show it yet. Okay, the total income, the grand total income for all auxiliaries is $15,240,000. The expenses is just below $10 million. So there's a net profit of $5,400,000. Well, out of that $5,400,000, the university has to pay $3.5 million towards the mortgage for the new residence halls and Brady apartments each year, and then they have to pay $460,000. They have to put it in a reserve account, so when the air conditioners go out, they have money to fix it. It's sort of like an escrow for maintenance and repair, so that the facilities don't rot away and get worse after year. The same thing happens with the cafeteria. The university pays about $400,000 a year for the student union cafeteria facilities mortgage, and then they have to put 80,000 away a year in a reserve fund that's going to pay for repairs and replacements to maintain the facility. In addition, whatever your mortgage is, like we have to pay about 3.8 million between all of them in mortgage. The bonds have a covenant. A covenant means an agreed, all overwhelming, all bearing, definitive amount. And so, if the mortgage is say $1,000, we have to generate enough income to exceed that by 25%, 20, 25, or 30%, depending on the year the bonds were sold, because they don't want people scrimping to have income to meet the mortgage. And so out of that 3.7 million, we have to make 1.3 of that times that in net profit. So if you take 3.7 and you multiply it times 1.3, it comes to about 3.7 and another million too. So it comes to about 4,900,000. Well, that suddenly wipes out that 55.4 million. And so Nichols has always met its bonded indebtedness. That's why we've been able to get funding for the rec center, for roads and repairs, for renovations to the cafeteria, to the student union, to family housing units and the other housing units. But again, all of these monies are paid for by students who use those services, who use the services. And each unit has to make enough money each year so that when all the monies are added together in one big lump pool, that we generate enough money to meet the mortgage for the facilities, put money in reserve and repair replacement. So when repairs have to be made, there's money to pay for it. Something as simple as the streets. About 12, 13 years ago, they resurfaced a bunch of streets in parking lots where we had to sell bonds. So we took out a loan for about $3 million to repair all the streets in parking lots because they were really in bad condition. Well, those things are paid off by the decal fees that students pay each year because the university doesn't want to take money out of instruction or library or operations of the campus to pay for parking services that faculty, staff, and students use. And so basically, the university operates like a business. It has to generate income to pay its bills. Anything it spends above the state appropriation, it have to be pretty good guarantee of that income being generated because the state won't come. If Nichols could not make its mortgage payment next year, the state would not come bail it out. We'd have to figure out a way to make cuts in the operations of the campus to pay those mortgages off. This is called an auxiliary fund budget. And if you look at all the different functions, continuing education is like the kiddie camps, the art classes, the non-credit wine tasting and whatever they do, sugar technology. And so they have the income and the expenses, and each of these units have to generate enough money to where it adds up. Another form of auxiliaries is athletics. Okay. First, we'll look at the file on income. Basically, each year, football generates $968,000 of income. Basketball about $425,000. All other men's sports and all women's sports about $150,000 together. And then there's other activities. The other activities are from the foundations like the Colonel Club and the Nichols Foundation give about $400,000 a year. Students have voted self-assessment fees to the value of $2.7 million a year. They said rather than take it out of instruction and that, let's take it out of here. The conference pays us back about $450,000. Other income, which comes from things like when they park in cars and they charge a fee, or when somebody awards money, but about $190,000 a year. Transfers from the university. the university transfers from its budget about 2.5 million a year, whereas the other schools in our system will transfer about between 3.7 and $5 million a year. We just don't have the money to take that much out of our operating service fee. And a lot of people say, well, why don't we keep that 2.7 million and don't have athletics? Well, what you find out is as you look at the categories together, we wouldn't have game guarantees. So let's say we're starting at 7.8 million. You take the game guarantees away of 1.2, you're suddenly down to 6.5. You take away the scholarships because if you don't have athletic teams, then you don't have athletic scholarships. And so that's 2.7. So now you're down to about 4.3. If you don't have athletics, you're not in a conference. So that's another $500,000 wiped out. And then you also have a thing where we don't award the maximum number of scholarships that each sport can have because we just don't have the money to do it. And say like the football team, I think probably has between 90 and 100 kids on the team. There's only 53 scholarships. So the other 60 or 45, 50, or 60 are paying their way. And a lot of those people are coming here to go to school because they want to play football. And it's the same thing with some of the other sports. Basketball has, I think, 12 maximum scholarships, so they may have 3 or 4 walk-ons. Baseball only has 11.7 scholarships, or 10.7 if you softball or baseball, but yet there's 35 people on the team. And so that's generating income and tuition from 25 or 30 students. And so we may have over 350 students in athletics, but we may only have 150 scholarships. And so if you wipe out that income, if you take out all the income that it's generating from tuition, from fees from students, from game guarantees, from ticket sales, from boosters clubs, you're going to find that the total cost to the university is about $150,000 to $175,000 a year. And you're going to say, well, that's a lot of money. Well, that's a marketing plan. If when you listen on TV, they don't talk a lot about our English or our chemistry department. You don't see the local newspaper or regional newspapers writing anything about Nichols' chemistry department. And I'm not making fun of chemistry department. I'm just saying people like that. And then you don't see people coming when we have literary day. The parking lot's not filled with tailgaters calling, "Go English test kids! Go English test kids!" They want to feel a part of something that they feel like they're part of the community. They're part of the Nichols community, and so all those people are out there for that game last week. But even the small sports like tennis, there's not a lot of people go see it, but you may have 10 or 15 from time to time. They may not come to campus for any other reason the whole year, but they'll come to campus, and if they're really dedicated fans, you can approach them and ask for donations over a long period of time and generate income. And that's what we're trying to do with athletics, is to generate income and try to put us in a position where we can compete with the other schools. Our budget's one of the smallest budgets in the country. Our budget's about $8 million, and when you look at Stephen F. Austin football, their football budget's about $6 million alone. And so, well, how does that make a difference? Facilities, equipment, travel. When they go on a travel, they bring all 105, but we may only bring 85 because that's all we can afford to bring. Yeah. And so, and then if you don't have a football team, do you need a marching band? What else does the band perform for? Now they have the string quartets and all that would keep going on, but you wouldn't have a marching band to go to athletic events. You wouldn't have cheerleaders. You wouldn't have athletic trainers. And think of all, and the last time I checked, I don't think the athletic trainers get scholarships. And so they may get some student employment, but they don't get a full ride, so most of them are paying their own way. And so if you take of all the parts of the income flow and back it out, it's a minimal cost to the campus, but yet it's an ongoing operational income that we would lose from that self-generated fund that you listed earlier. That 51 million would suddenly go down to about 48 million a year. And so when people say, well, why we're paying coaches this, or why are we spending that much money on scholarships? Because one, marketing, it brings people to campus. It gives people a sense of connection to the community. It makes business sense to do it. You also have a situation where like I said earlier, that's maybe the only time of the year that those people set foot on our campus. And so when it comes time to putting pressure on the state legislature to appropriate monies for universities or nickels, well, the people in the community go, you to the reps, you better support the universities. You better support the universities. And then if you also look at it, student athletes have a higher graduation rate than the general population. Why? Because they have to pass more than 23 credit hours per year to be eligible for the next year. They don't have that same rule for every other student that's just a general student that's not involved in anything. And so, all in all, higher education has to run like a business. This $7.7 million that they want to spend, it's all got to balance out. They have to. That's why we go into LSU next year. I don't know what their paying is. I hope their paying is $1 million. But like when we went to Kansas, we probably got $450,000 or $500,000 just for making that trip. If not, if we don't play those what they call game guarantee games, we lose a ton of money and would have to cut a whole bunch of athletic staffing, supplies, travel. We'd have to limit travel because that's once you got the people in place, the bigger expense becomes travel. Because if we're in a conference, well, if they're going to come here, we're going to have to go there. Okay, so you're saying, well, that's Louisiana universities. That's how University of Louisiana system schools budget. The community colleges are going to have a higher state appropriation amount than self-generated. And there's a reason for that. Is because, one, the state has looked at community technical colleges as being a benefit to the business and technical community, the hospitals, the shipyards, the petroleum people, the chemical plant people, et cetera, like that. The healthcare profession depends a lot on what university produces in terms of graduates, not just nurses, but also respiratory therapists, physical therapists, the whole spectrum of the healthcare profession. A lot of people start in that profession with associate or technical degrees. And if you look at the development of higher education across the country, yes, there are the original universities that started. But if you look from the 1960s forward, regional institutions have grown up into universities, and the technical community colleges have become more like the old state institutions used to be. And so there's not going to be the same cost to operate a two-year institution. If they have a high-tech program like petroleum services, the community colleges generally get the business and industry to supply the equipment. They're not going to be teaching 300 and 400 level classes. They're going to be teaching 100 and 200 level classes, at least in Louisiana. In some other states, they're allowing community colleges to now offer 4-year degrees to help meet the demand for nurses, for phlebotomists, and things like that. And so that's basically an overview of budgeting in Louisiana. One thing I did forget to do, and we're going to go back to it. Operating services. I don't know if I explained that earlier. There's 4 basic areas. There's personnel costs, which is salaries, compensation, and benefits, and then there's operating expenses. Operating services is going to be everything from paying the water bill, paying the light bill, to keep the campus open, the elevated contract inspections that we have to have, the fire safety systems that we have to have in place, the heating and air conditioning systems that are in place, the copy machine rentals, telephone operations. We're part of LONI, which is Louisiana Online. There's a supercomputer network that connects all universities and state government in the state. Well, we have to pay a portion of that expense of operation, so we have to send money, and that's going to be in that interagency transfers of $1 million a year. And the differences between that and the auxiliary budgets is when the auxiliary budgets, when they need furniture, equipment, and athletics or housing, we have to find that money in our regular budget to pay for it, because that's not a big ticket item. We can pay for reserves, we can pay for roofs, we can pay for air conditioning heating systems, we can pay for elevator repair replacement, but the things like the mattresses and the chairs and the beds that come out of the housing budget have to be paid for out of their budget. or from the reserve that we deposited each year. Any questions on state budgeting? Okay. What state do you have?
Tennessee.
Have you found any information about how they budget or what they budget?
Not yet, but when I went to school, I did my undergrad in Tennessee.
Oh, let's just plug in.
I did my undergrad in Tennessee, and I went to a different school. It was a private school, so things were different than here. I realized about some differences.
Well, you're gonna find that they. I don't know what I'm doing today. We're just gonna leave it alone.
For example, like I never had to pay for the parking pass. It was free for us, so we just went to like a place and pick it up. I never had to pay for a PO box. It was a right for every student that lived on campus. They had to have a PO box, so they just gave us a PO box.
So
and like I arrived here and I had to pay $50 for a parking pass. I was surprised, and then I went over there. I'm international, so I don't have an address here in America. So I was like, where can I get my billings? And like she was like, you have to pay
post office box.
Yes, I was like.
And the reason for that is because when it comes time to repair or replace those boxes, or to pay the personnel, that comes out of well, there's a budget unit titled Post Office Services.
Yeah.
And so it loses money every year because we don't have as many boxes at $35 or $50 a year. If you just have one staff person, it's not going to pay for itself. But they also handle all the mail for the rest of the campus, so all the departments don't have to run downtown and handle mail. And so it's a service aspect that if we're going to communicate, there has to be mail. And primarily in the South is where they're going to charge for mailboxes. In other states, they may allow them to include that in the regular tuition and fees. Whereas the history of the development of the state colleges in Louisiana, basically, Nichols, when it started, was a 2-year junior college.
Okay.
Didn't even have postal operations. They had a mailbox for the school. Well, then when we went from 23 to 500, then they needed somebody else to handle registration, to collect fees, to handle money. And each one of these buildings, as they were added on, they had to add personnel. And so depending on when it was and what the budgets were issued, sometimes the only way we could have it's just like every other school in the state had a rec center. Some of them paid for by the state. Nichols couldn't get enough political power from its representatives to get that money from the state. So the only way we did it was put it to a vote to our students and said, do you want a rec center? And they said, yes, we do. And so they voted to have it. If the students hadn't voted to have that, we still wouldn't have a rec center.
Wow.
What about the community colleges in Tennessee?
Not sure.
Okay, you may want to check to see if they're funded any differently. And if you have difficulty, and I'm telling everybody this, if you're having difficulty finding sources for your state report, communicate with me, and I'll put you in touch with the websites, with the documents that are available online, because most of them are public record. Or public record.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened here. Do you have any other questions about budgeting? Just make sure your report includes, because it includes the finance board, how do they finance the operations of the campus, and be able to compare and contrast that of how it's maybe different or like it's done in other states. I think that's in section 4 in the state report thing. All right. And I sent emails out to everybody today, reminding them if they haven't already confirmed their presentation dates and their.
I confirm.
Yeah, but I'm saying, there's only 2 students, but I couldn't single them out.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell somebody if you didn't do your work.
Right.
And there's about 5 or 6 people that are late on their annotated bibliography, and I sent a copy of a good work report, so it sort of gives people an idea of what they have to do.
Okay.
All right. Well, let me see if I can save this now. Okay. I don't know what happened to that split screen.
I don't know.
Normally it's supposed to move where your finger goes. Close this, close this, close this. Okay. Stop share. I tell you what, we're going to find another classroom to work in because this one seems to not work.
So is that it?
That's it for the presentation today.
Okay. Alright, so I'll take a look at community college as well.
And if you have trouble finding stuff, let me know.
Do you want me to take a look at private school and state school? So
I'm
just
primarily focusing on state funding
Okay.
because the private schools are all so different.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop sharing.